Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. The US says it has killed ISIS leader Abu Yusuf in an airstrike in Syria. It comes as US diplomats make a groundbreaking trip to Damascus. Meanwhile, two Turkish journalists covering the fight between Turkish-backed fighters and Syrian Kurdish militia are killed in northern Syria in a reported drone attack. A Donald Trump-backed spending bill fails in the US House of Representatives as dozens defy the president-elect. And Russia carry out cyber attacks on Ukraine state registries and fire missiles in Zelensky's hometown. To our top story, and the US claim they have killed ISIS leader Abu Yusuf during an airstrike in Syria. It comes as a group of American diplomats make a historic visit to Damascus. Barbara Leaf, the State Department's senior Middle East official, is leading the delegation, which also includes hostage envoy Roger Carstens and Daniel Rubenstein, who the Biden administration has tapped to lead talks with Syria's new administration, who toppled Bashar al-Assad's government last week. It's the first formal US diplomatic visit to the Syrian capital in more than a decade. Let's go live to Washington now and speak to our correspondent, Sally Patterson. Sally, thank you for joining us. In the last hour, the US says it has killed the leader of ISIS in Syria. There are concerns about the group's resurgence. Is this latest news a win for the Biden administration and the delegation who are currently in Damascus?
Well, we're hearing details coming about that strike, which killed ISIS leader in Syria, Abu Yusuf. That's what the United States says. They said another top ISIS official was killed in that targeted attack. Now, we've seen a US statement saying the United States, working with its allies and partners in the region, will not allow ISIS to take advantage of the current situation in Syria. And it alleges that ISIS had the intent to break out of detention over 8,000 ISIS operatives being held in facilities in Syria. And what we can confer from this targeted strike is that this is a real show of power, really, by the administration here in the US to show that despite the chaos unraveling in Syria, the different groups who are perhaps vying for power there, the US is not going to sit back and let that happen. They say they're going to go in with a heavy fist and really target those groups that have been on their radar for several years now. And this, they feel, is the opportunity to really go in and strike while the iron's hot.
Show of power, as you say there, but the US is keen to maintain relations in the region. What are they working towards? What's the overall goal?
Well, I think we can look at this trip going on as we speak in two parts. Firstly, US officials say they're there to meet with the de facto leaders currently in place, HTS. This is one of the first times that we're seeing this real normalization of contact between those leaders now in Syria and the United States. So it's really a pretty big moment for those relations and what the future of that relationship might look like. And we saw a statement coming out last Saturday from the US as well as several other countries, Arab nations, the United Kingdom, the European Union as well, which talked about wanting to ensure that the next government of Syria is inclusive. It holds space for all of the different groups in the country as well. And that's a narrative that we're seeing coming out from the US, this sense that whatever happens now, it needs to take into account all of those different groups, those minority groups in particular, currently living in Syria, and it needs to be a representative government. That's what that statement said. Now, we also understand that as part of this delegation, there is going to be a concerted effort to meet with Syrian people themselves, whether those are civil society actors, leaders from minority groups as well, to understand what they want the future of Syria to look like.
Just in 60 seconds, can you round up something for us? When it comes to Washington as well as London, it still designates HTS as a terror organisation. Is this visit a sign that they could prepare to delist the group?
That's right. The US, in a way, is in a relatively tricky spot because they're going to have negotiations with leaders who they have decided is a terrorist organization, and that's because they broke away from Al-Qaeda. That was the group's foundations. Now, that group is very strong in its saying that it's no longer part of that group. It says it is not a terrorist organization. It says it has made many changes. It says, for example, that it will continue to support women's education in Syria and support women's rights in the country, respect the rights of minority groups as well. But we need to remember that Donald Trump, the president-elect of the United States, is coming back into office in a month's time. And it was under his first term that the group was designated a terrorist organization. And so it's really going to be up to him to decide what the future of those negotiations and those relationships look like, and whether the HTS has done enough to distance itself from those terrorist roots and prove that it is a player that can meet those others on a world stage.
Sally Patterson in Washington, thank you so much for joining us. Turkish President Erdogan has said terrorist groups which threaten Syria's survival, such as ISIS and the Kurdish PKK and its affiliates, must be eradicated. Sporadic fighting continues in the country's northeast between the US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces, where 2 Kurdish journalists were also reportedly killed by a Turkish drone strike earlier this morning. Erdogan has taken a hard line publicly, but negotiations with Washington are ongoing over the role of the SDF and their autonomous governance in a new Syrian state following the downfall of Bashar al-Assad. For more on this, I'm joined from Washington by Mutlu Civiroglu, a Kurdish affairs analyst and VOA journalist. Mutlu, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Turkish President Erdogan said earlier today that terrorist groups such as ISIS and the PKK, which threaten Syria's existence, must be eradicated. Does this suggest an offensive is still on the cards?
Yes. When we weigh the statement, it appears so. But when you look at the reality, ISIS indeed is a threat. And just today, like you guys also covered, CENTCOM announced a leader was killed. In the recent months, ISIS have been trying to build up, reconstruct its power, make a comeback, getting advantage of this situation, post-Assad situation. Yes, as ISIS is certainly a threat. But in terms of PKK, that's really not true. The PKK in Syria, now the Turkish government, Mr. Erdogan, equalizes SDF with PKK, but many people believe this is just a pretext to make a ground operation, military operation. So the SDF has been there fighting against ISIS, has been a major force for stabilizing Syria, not destabilizing. SDF are made of people, Syrian people, Kurds, Arabs, Turkmens, Yazidis, Christians, Syriacs. So it's made of Syrian people, by Syrian people, for the lens of Syria. So that's really hard to understand. But looking at Washington and other capitals, this argument really does not have base, and it's not supported. That nobody believes that the SDF, the Kurdish political and military establishment, has any threat to anyone.
Negotiations with Washington are still going on at the moment over the future of the Kurdish-controlled enclave in northeast Syria, but fighting is ongoing, as we know. What are some of the possible terms being discussed to bring about an end to the fighting?
Yeah, right before I joined you, I had some news that in the very fierce clashes are taking place at the moment around Kobani. You're right, near the Tishrin Karakozak bridge that connects Minbic to Kobani. So there has been very fierce fighting. And you also mentioned in the broadcast 2 journalists were killed with the Turkish drone star in the same area. And one of them was I know them both. I talked with them all. They were, journalists. But Nazım, the male journalist, was a great journalist. I met him during the Bakos operation when ISIS caliphate was ended by SDF, by the US-led international coalition. So these two journalists are the most recent victims of this tension. What needs to be done? The Turkish government shouldn't see existence of Kurds as a threat. I talked to Ms. Ilham Ahmed a few days ago, one of the Syrian Kurdish leaders. She reiterated again that they are not threat against Turkey. They want a good relationship with Turkey. Everybody I talk to, they say these things, that they are not a threat. They have never been a threat. Today I talked to Kobani. I shared a video. Maybe your viewers have seen that. It's a peaceful city, harmless city. There has never been one bullet shot to Turkey from Kobani or anywhere else. So there is no good to increase the tension for anyone. Syria, after Assad, Syria is now looking for opening a new page. There was optimism, there was hope, but such an operation would cause more catastrophic, more devastation, more displaced people. The Kurds have already announced that. Mr. Mazlum Abdi, SDF general, said if Turkey is concerned with Kobani, we are ready to leave it, pull our forces and leave it to the internal police under the supervision of the US. So he has, to international media, he announced that, this kind of suggestion. So I think what Kurds are doing to do their best to assure any concerns that their neighbors have. In this context, they are doing their best to extend this to Turkey as well. But Turkey seems like very motivated to do such an operation. Now Turkey feels upper-handed. Turkey feels emboldened after the recent developments, topple of Bashar Assad. He's opening a new page, groups under its or direct or indirect control being powerful. I think Turkey is very eager to expand its control in the lands, in Syrian lands. That's why they are using existence of PKK in Syria. But the leaders I talk to, political military leaders I talk to in a daily basis, the regular people I talk to, they strongly denounce that, they strongly deny that. And yesterday, probably you covered, there was some mass demonstration in support of SDF. People of the region took the streets with SDF flags and with the new Syrian flags supporting SDF. SDF has not come from anywhere else. This has to be, clearly understood by everyone. They are the people of Kamishlo, Hasaka, Kobani, Afrin, Manbij, Raqqa, Deir ez-Zor. They are from that area. They have never come from anywhere else. They are the local people. SDF being there has been a stabilizing power, like I said. Thanks to SDF's YPG's work, thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands of people, didn't go, became refugees, became IDPs. They stayed in there. So this is not going to help anyone. The ISIS threat is real. CENTCOM has been warning for months that the situation is critical.
Mutlu, thank you so much for your views on that this evening. I do apologise, we have now run out of time, but that was Mutlu Civiroglu, a Kurdish affairs analyst and VOA journalist. Thank you for those insights this evening. Staying with Syria, and the UN's refugee agency expects 1 million people to return to the country in the next few months. Thousands of Syrians sought asylum in the UK, where thousands more also study and work. With preparations for a new government in Damascus underway, Stuart Smith spoke to Syrian communities in London about their hopes for the future.
As Syrians in Damascus celebrate the fall of the Assad dynasty, over 3,000 kilometres away in London, many share their optimism.
Absolutely happy, because we wait this since 2011, since the situation started. So we are so happy. If you ask any Syrian people, no more dictatorial, freedom now. So absolutely happy.
I am very happy and pleased that the Assad regime left us, and we are now in very good condition. I mean very good condition, and in good health. Security has returned to our country. They have returned everything to our country.
Some want to go back, but after so many years, a lot of them don't have homes or jobs to go back to. The UK has paused asylum applications from Syrian nationals while the picture back home becomes clearer, with both London and the UNHCR saying it's too early to know if Syria is safe. When there's more certainty about what happens next, computer engineer Hashem is considering starting a new life there after 15 years away.
Actually, it's quite sudden. The whole process is quite sudden, and people they're still processing what happened. And they are planning to be some balance between living in the UK, living in Syria in general.
I would prefer to return to my country after maybe a year or two, when the circumstances will improve. I will return to my country because in the end, a person has nothing but his homeland, his home, and his family. I mean, I do not prefer to be an expatriate, living alone abroad and dying alone abroad.
Elections have been promised by the de facto government in Syria, which could be the first step towards a functioning state, but there's a long way to go to rebuild.
The Syrian embassy in London remains closed since the ambassador was expelled in 2012, but a flag now hangs here for the first time in over a decade, though bearing 3 stars instead of 2.
The flag that's become synonymous with anti-Assad forces is a sign change is coming, and Syrians in London are hopeful it will bring good things, but many here are staying put until they know for sure. Stuart Smith, Al Arabiya News, London.
To the US now, and a government shutdown looks likely after a funding bill backed by Donald Trump failed to pass the House of Representatives. Some within his own Republican Party defied the president-elect, leaving lawmakers until midnight to work out a new deal on all sides, which all sides can agree on. Nick Harper has this report from Washington.
The bill is not passed.
The shutdown showdown. Late on Thursday, the US House voted down the deal, leaving the Republican House Speaker with some explaining to do.
This is Washington. This is how the lawmaking is done. It's a long process. Sometimes it takes a while to reach consensus.
But time is no longer on the lawmakers' side. They have just hours until the US government runs out of money. At 12:01 a.m. on Saturday, federal agencies will be forced to close, leaving hundreds of thousands of employees without pay just ahead of the holidays. But rewind to earlier this week, and the Democrats and Republicans had a bipartisan deal.
Take over, Elijah. Take over.
But incoming President Donald Trump, egged on by Elon Musk, told Republicans to reject it. They blasted concessions given to Democrats and demanded the debt ceiling be raised, making it easier for Trump to implement dramatic tax cuts when president. Under pressure from the president-elect, the deal fell apart, exasperating Democrats.
One or two puppet masters weigh in, and the extreme MAGA Republicans decide to do the bidding of the wealthy, the well-off, the well-connected, millionaires and billionaires, not working-class people.
A new, hastily arranged proposal, increasing the government's borrowing limit to 2027, was rejected in that Thursday evening vote, with dozens of Republicans refusing to back a bill that raises the debt ceiling without substantial spending cuts. It was a stinging rebuke for the incoming president and ups the ante on getting a deal done in time. Now, a nightmare before Christmas, as lawmakers scramble to do a deal and avoid a shutdown. They had been hoping to pass that bipartisan bill and head home for the holidays. But hours of talks and negotiations now lie ahead, with the political brinksmanship and furious partisan blame game only increasing. Nick Harper, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Lord Peter Mandelson, one of the best-known figures in British politics, will become the UK's next ambassador to the US. He'll be installed in Washington, D.C. following incoming US President Donald Trump's inauguration on the 20th of March. Mandelson previously spoke out against Trump's hostile relationship with China, calling him a bully for fueling trade wars. In Mayotte, an angry crowd booed and called for French President Emmanuel Macron to resign after he visited the region with aid and supplies following the destruction of Cyclone Chido. Macron decided to extend his visit to the island to inspect other affected areas. Officials in France's porous overseas territory have confirmed 31 fatalities and 2,500 injured. Sir Paul McCartney has reunited with his former Beatles bandmate Sir Ringo Starr during a gig at London's O2 Arena. The last time the pair played together was in 2019 during McCartney's Freshen Up tour. And a couple from India's southern state of Karnataka have taken legal action against each other and even considered a divorce regarding their baby's name. The unnamed mother refused to accept the name her husband had chosen for their child and had to get a court to intervene. The couple have now agreed to call their son Arivancharara, which means of nobility, and they've decided to continue with their marriage. To Ukraine, and Russia has carried out a mass cyber attack on the country's state registries, according to the Deputy Prime Minister. Details about Ukrainian citizens' births, deaths, marriages and property ownership have all been affected. Ukraine believes the attack was specifically targeted to disrupt the work of the country's infrastructure. Meanwhile, Russian missiles were fired earlier this morning into cities of Kyiv and Kyiv. One person died, many others were left injured, and buildings were badly damaged. Kyiv, where a man and a teenage girl were pulled from the rubble, is home to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. Let's go live to Kyiv to speak to our correspondent, Alex Cadier, who's there for us. Alex, let's start with the cyber attacks. Ukraine has said Russia's spy agency was behind it and criminal proceedings have now started. How damaging was that attack and what's been done to rectify the situation now?
Well, it's been described as the largest cyber attack on Ukraine from Russia in recent memory. That's according to the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, who is also the Justice Minister in this government, saying that it shut down state registries and online services like marriage registrations and car registrations and the kind of everyday services that you would do online with government services. So certainly a big attack. It's been attributed by the Ukrainians to the Russian a hacking group associated to the Russian military intelligence, the GRU, which we know has been behind a lot of cyber attacks on Ukraine. There has been an exchange, certainly since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, of cyber attacks between Ukraine and Russia. There will be, of course, increased security, but what we understand from Ukrainian officials is that no data was leaked. Crucially, they say that that was the idea behind this attack, to get public records of Ukraine. None of that was leaked, but it may take a couple of weeks to get all these services back online, which would suggest some kind of massive security shutdown in the face of this cyber attack. Ukraine, an increasingly online government, increasingly government services are online, and therefore this cyber attack will be taken incredibly seriously.
What's the situation like on the ground in Kyiv after this morning's ballistic missile attack in the city?
Well, the city was rocked by explosions just about a couple kilometers from where I'm standing right now. A series of explosions, including that strike. We know that one person was killed and about a dozen were injured, 5 of which were rushed to hospital. A tense day in the city, but certainly something that people from Kyiv are used to experiencing. We were at the scene about an hour after the strike, and the damage was very significant. We saw residential buildings completely stripped of all their windows, shattered in the front of a large hotel as well near that location, as well as a building holding the embassies of Portugal, Argentina, Morocco. This building was also damaged. Those windows were blown in by the blast. Now, Ukrainians Air Force saying that 5 ballistic missiles targeted this city. all of them were shot down, but debris fell onto the city, causing fires. We saw dozens of cars burnt out on the street, and as I said, extensive damage, including to a church, a cathedral, I should say, in Kyiv as well. So certainly a very tense day, worrying that damage can still be struck so deep into the center of Kyiv, and that will be playing on the minds of people as they go into their weekend. This alert started very early this morning. We now worry about tomorrow morning.
Alex, Ukraine has revealed today that Russia has suffered its worst daily losses since the full-scale invasion began. 2,200 Russian troops have died in the last 24 hours. Are people wondering how long this can physically go on for?
Well, the last record was just over 2,000. That was back at the end of November. So certainly those Russian casualties, according to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, seem to be increasing, certainly trending upwards. Military experts very clear that this is just the way Russia wages war, what they call the meat grinder approach of just throwing as many soldiers, often not very well trained, into the conflict, many of which losing their lives, as we heard, 2,200 in 24 hours. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that Ukraine has the upper hand. They are still massively outnumbered, even though the casualty numbers, according to the Institute for the Study of Wars, is about 1 to 5, so 1 Ukrainian soldier for 5 Russian soldiers. They're still massively outnumbered, and we've seen that, the Ukrainian army withdrawing from a pocket near the town of Pokrovsk because they are at the risk of being encircled. We are very much in an attritional, slow phase of this war, but just because the line isn't moving as much as it could, that doesn't make this any less brutal a war. So certainly on the front line, slow but very violent.
Alex Cadier in Kyiv, thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at the top business news. Starbucks baristas are holding a 5-day strike in the US, which could reach hundreds of stores by Christmas Eve if a deal over work and pay isn't reached. A union representing more than 11,000 workers say the walkouts will begin across Los Angeles, Chicago and Seattle before spreading across the country. It follows a union calling for Starbucks to raise wages and also staffing, as well as implement better schedules for its workers. Now, UK government borrowing fell to £11.2 billion in November, the lowest figure for the month in 3 years, according to the Office for National Statistics. Debt interest was down £4.7 billion from a year earlier to £3 billion, mainly due to lower inflation, providing a boost for British Chancellor Rachel Reeves. Separate figures also from the ONS today showed retail sales rose slightly last month, helped by stronger trading at supermarkets. Now let's turn to some sports news. Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk shared an astonishing 11-minute face-off in one of the most remarkable head-to-heads in boxing history. Both heavyweights meet again on Saturday night in Riyadh as Fury bids for revenge and heavyweight gold. Ukraine's Usyk narrowly outpointed the self-appointed Gypsy King back in May, becoming the first undisputed heavyweight champion in 24 years. And Tottenham has survived a Manchester United comeback to reach a League Cup semi-finals with a 4-3 win at home. The game was a gripping tie littered with bizarre errors from Tottenham's goalkeeper Fraser Forster, who allowed United a lifeline. But 2 goals from Dominic Solanke kept Spurs out in front. Arsenal will face Newcastle United in the other semi-final. A reminder of our top stories. The US says it has killed ISIS leader Abu Yusuf in an airstrike in Syria. It comes as US diplomats make a groundbreaking trip to Damascus. Meanwhile, 2 Turkish journalists covering the fight between Turkish-backed fighters and Syrian Kurdish militia are killed in northern Syria in a reported drone attack. A Donald Trump-backed spending bill fails in the US House of Representatives as dozens defy the president-elect. And Russia carry out cyber attacks on Ukraine's state registries and fire missiles in Zelensky's hometown. That's all from us on W News. Thanks for joining us. Riz Khan is coming up next. And don't miss Tom Burgess-Watson with GNT. Good night.